Now we're going. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming in today. We know it's been a trying week. Our meeting today will be recorded and archived on the Humanists of Greater Portland website, as well as on our YouTube page later on. Humanism is a philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. Humanists strive to lead meaningful and ethical lives. We use reason and empathy to guide our decisions and actions. We live meaningful lives because we honor the fact that this is the only life of which we are certain. As humanists, we affirm the dignity and worth of all people. We do this not only to acknowledge that all humans are capable of amazing accomplishments, but also for the possibility of peace and well-being when people interact with respect for one another. We are happy to have Al Christians do our reading this morning.
Okay, our reading today is a poem from 1895 written by H.C. Dodge. And this is somewhat of a somber poem about America and things that happen here, but it's a somber poem that glistens with a kind of a dull, well-worn finish of hope and optimism, despite its somberness. And the very interesting thing about H.C. Dodge, who is a poet and author, the name is attached to several books, several kind of commonplace poems that were published in the late 1800s, but nothing is known about H.C. Dodge. H.C. Dodge could have been male or female, could have been of any race, creed, color, any age group, any social class. So for all we know. So H.C. Dodge stands as a totem for the average American of the 19th century. And the title of the poem is America. My country, 'tis of thee, land of lost liberty. Of thee we sing, land which the millionaires who govern our affairs own for themselves and heirs. Hail to thy king, land once of noble braves, but now of wretched slaves. Alas, too late. We saw sweet freedom die from letting bribers nigh, and unprized suffrage buy, and mourn thy fate. Land where the wealthy few can make the many do their royal will, and tax for selfish greed thy toilers till they bleed, and those yet not weak-kneed crash down and kill. Land where a rogue is raised on high and loudly praised for worst of crimes, of which the end must be a hell of cruelty, as proved by history of ancient times. My country, 'tis of thee, betrayed by bribery, of thee we sing. We might have saved thee long, had we, when proud and strong, put down the cursed wrong that makes a king. Thank you.
So the next piece we're moving on to is our speaker portion. Now, before Mr. Bell presents to us, I would just like to bring up that this is a difficult subject. We might have conflicting beliefs about this, and that's all right. That's okay. We need to be accepting of people with different backgrounds and beliefs than our own. It's okay to be challenged as long as we are respectful, as long as we're able to listen and come together as a community. This is the only way that we're going to be able to move forward together. The Humanists of Greater Portland is a chapter of the American Humanist Association. The American Humanist Association has developed 10 commitments, which are a general guide that recognizes behaviors that follow humanist principles. Our topic today is about cruelty in Palestine, U.S. imperialism and us, by Curtis Bell. It incorporates the humanist commitments of social justice and global awareness. I would now like to introduce today's speaker, Curtis Bell. He's a retired neuroscientist. He was the former president of Unitarian Universalists for Justice in the Middle East. Mr. Bell was born in the Middle East to American parents and went to high school in Beirut, Lebanon. As a student, he imprinted on the issue of Palestinian human rights. He retains an interest and concern for the people of the Middle East and is an activist for Palestinian human rights. Please welcome Mr. Bell.
I would first like to take issue with the statement often in our press that this attack was unprovoked. In much of our press, history didn't begin on October 7, and Palestinians had been suffering from Israeli oppression for 7 decades, and the apartheid character of Israel had been clear and well tabulated for by Palestinian, by the Israeli human rights organization Beit Salem, by the Human Rights Watch declaring Israel an apartheid state, by Amnesty International declaring Israel an apartheid state, and by another Israeli human rights organization called Yes Din, which declared Israel an apartheid state. And so Gaza itself had been subject of, ever since 2005, of really a very, very oppressive siege in which medical offense, food was controlled, and they were really under a very demanding siege, and they had been attacked several times during that period by Israel. Israel called it mowing the lawn in Gaza. So to the point that the UN in 2015 said that Gaza would be unlivable in 2020. Well, it's a lot more unlivable right now. As Craig Corey, you might be familiar with Rachel Corey, as she was in 2003, I believe, she was run over by a Israeli bulldozer in defending a home in Rafah in the south of Gaza. Her father and mother have taken on the role of activists. They didn't just accept this and go on about their lives. They have become active in all over the world and calling for an end to Israeli apartheid. And as Craig Corey, father of Rachel Corey, said, if the oppression that has gone on for decades had been attended to earlier, October 7 and the Israeli violence might never have happened. And I think that's true. We have allowed Israel to maintain in a very oppressive apartheid conditions for the people that they're responsible for in the West Bank and Gaza and in Israel itself. And I would say, whatever one might think of violence in struggles to end oppression, such use is enshrined as a right within the United Nations. And I wish that Hamas had only attacked soldiers and had not killed civilians or taken hostages. Both killing civilians and taking hostages are war crimes, and it would have been better for all of us if those war crimes had not been committed by Hamas. But the violent attack on Israel itself, I think, and a response to their own oppression, I think you cannot really criticize from the point of view of no violence at all. So the attack was hardly unprovoked. I might also point out that sending military aid to Israel is a violation of U.S. law, that the Arms Export Control Act, the Foreign Assistance Act, and the Leahy Amendment all say that U.S. military aid must not be given to countries that systematically violate human rights. And the violation of human rights by Israel is pretty clear. But that has been ignored. I think that what is happening in Gaza can be called genocide. I'm worried about the initial use of that term. I think that Israel would really just like to have no Palestinians in the land, and whatever. But I think if you're going to force people whose lives and livelihoods are in that land, out of their land, off of their land that they have lived in for generations, you're going to involve violence. You're going to involve how do you, and so when you look at what's happening in Gaza, what can you call, except genocide, the bombing of whole apartments with people in them, buildings filled with people, when over 50,000 are known to have been killed, about 43,000 are clearly identified, and at least 10,000 are thought to be under the rubble. And Lancet magazine has actually declared that the number of dead may be 3 times that, as much as 180,000 people. All of the starvation and disease that has been brought about by the disruption have probably caused a much larger number than 50,000 to be killed in Gaza. 100,000 people seriously injured. Mosques, churches, hospitals, sewage treatment plants, universities have all been bombed or detonated. It's not just that the bombing has occurred, but they systematically put explosives around the universities of Gaza to blow them up. There's kind of a, not just a effort to make life impossible, but a kind of ethnocide, you might say. Right now, and what do you call it when massive deaths from famine and disease are not considered important? We're witnessing right now in the north of Gaza, just north of Gaza City, something called the General's Plan, which involves cutting off of all humanitarian aid to the area, essentially using starvation as a weapon of war. And then anybody who doesn't leave, and leaving is not always easy, but many people don't want to leave, many people can't leave, are considered combatants. So it's a rather terrible plan. I would say one of the things that really strikes me as medievally as brutal, as indeed medievally brutal, is the cutting off of aid to UNRWA. UNRWA is the United Nations, as you all probably know, the United Nations organization that provides humanitarian aid, education, and healthcare for Palestinians in the camps that are around Palestine, in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, within the West Bank and within Gaza, provides all of those facilities, including food. They have an organization. It is really the only organization that has the skill and the equipment and the people to provide that aid, and to cut off that method of delivering aid seems to me brutal and cruel. And right now, the United Nations, the United States is the only country that does not fund UNRWA. All other countries have either renewed their commitment to UNRWA or have increased their commitment to UNRWA. UNRWA provides the schools, provides clinics, provides food to people in the camps around and in Israel, Palestine. I might mention that on December 6th at 6:30, we'll have an event at First Unitarian Church in support of UNRWA. We'll have one of the national people from UNRWA USA come and give a speech. We hope to have, I believe it was Michael Fakhri, who's the UN rapporteur for food insecurity. He's a member of the law school at Eugene, come up, and we'll have an event and with some sweets, Palestinian sweets afterwards, and time for discussion. But it will be a fundraiser and education about the need for keeping UNRWA alive and well. That will be December 6th at 6:30. I have some flyers out on the desk out there, which you can take if you'd like. I would say, as Americans, the most important thing to know about what's happening in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon is our complicity. This is not only an Israeli war, this is an American war on Palestinians, on Lebanese, and the potential for a war on Iran, which I think most of us can agree would be even a greater disaster than the war in Iraq. Iran is a major country, 70 million people, highly sophisticated country with enough weapons to fight back, unlike Iraq. Those are U.S. bombs dropped from U.S. planes. Those are U.S. missiles and U.S. shells killing and destroying Gaza, killing people and destroying Gaza. Those are U.S. diplomats preventing action by the United Nations Security Council. Most recently, the U.S. has placed its major anti-missile defense system, I don't know what THAAD stands for, but it's a highly sophisticated anti-missile defense system that they've installed in Israel, along with about 200 American personnel to manage it and control it and use it. So I think I see this as a very provocative act. It's giving Israel this very sophisticated anti-missile system means that Israel can then fire rockets at whoever it pleases, whether it's into Lebanon or into Iran or into Iraq, with much less fear of retaliation against the small country of Israel. So I see this giving of this missile, this highly sophisticated defense system, and placing U.S. soldiers at risk of a war as a kind of commitment on the part of the U.S. to follow Israel into its war with Iran, and as it has followed it into its war on Lebanon and on Gaza. So I see that then as a rather frightening commitment. It seems like the U.S. has so far allowed itself to be dragged into this humanitarian crisis, this war on Lebanon, and the potential for what I would see as a really disastrous war on Iran. There have been precedents for the U.S. An Israeli general, in fact, said that if the U.S. declared that it would not continue to provide military equipment and supplies to Israel, that the war would stop within 3 or 4 days. That we've provided thousands and thousands of tons of military equipment to Israel over the past year or so. And if we didn't, the war would stop. And there have been precedents for the U.S. to declare to Israel that it will not continue to support what Israel's doing. In 1956, Israel, France, and England declared war on Egypt. Nasser had recently taken over the Suez Canal as a part of Egypt and a right to control it. And France and England were deeply disturbed, and they brought Israel into a war on Egypt and to gain back the Suez Canal. And Eisenhower saw this as a huge mistake, and he told France and Germany to stop and Israel to stop, and they did. They stopped immediately. And similarly, in 82, in 84 rather, President Reagan was alarmed by all of the violence that Menachem Begin was visiting upon Lebanon in a war in Lebanon, and he told Menachem Begin to stop that war, and Menachem Begin stopped it in 20 minutes. So the power that we have not used the power that we have to limit this humanitarian crisis, this really awful crisis going on in Gaza, and now increasingly in Lebanon, and to a high degree even on the West Bank. Some 700 people have been killed in the West Bank just in the last year. And I would say there are two explanations for why the U.S. is so strongly coupled and so strongly tied to Israel. One is electoral, that the elected officials are afraid of losing votes of Jewish people and of the Christian Zionists. The Christian Zionists are actually some consider a more powerful force in controlling this than the Jewish people. That the Christian Zionists, there are like 25,000 Christian Zionists who express themselves very strongly through groups like the CUFI, the Community United for Israel, under Reverend Hagee. That's one explanation for that all this pressure from constituents on U.S. representatives and senators for U.S. support for Israel. But a second one, I think, and I think this is the one that I'll emphasize, I think is very important, and that is that we need a powerful and solid ally to control that region for our own imperial interests. The region is full of oil and gas that countries need. We not only want that for ourselves, but we want to be able to control it so that if Europe wants more oil and gas, we would like to be able to keep that from them. Or if Japan or China needs more oil and gas, we would like to be able to control that. So, and then the trade routes are very important, I think, too. The Suez Canal, some 20% of the world's trade goes through the Suez Canal every year. It's a very central part of the nexus where Africa and Asia come together right there. So I think Israel aids U.S. imperialism, and not only in the Middle East, but it's been for many years. Or you might know that during the Central American wars, that Israel provided armaments to Somoza and other dictators in Central America. They've done the same in some countries in South America. I think so. It's not only in the Middle East, although that's the focus really. Jeff Helper, who I have a great deal of respect for, he's an American Jewish man that moved to Israel about 40 years ago, and he founded an organization called the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. He is a very articulate and able person, and he has described this worldwide sale of armaments and how Israel can neutralize opposition by cementing its military aid to countries like India or other countries in the world. And he has written a book called War Against the People that goes into great detail about all the ways in which Israel provides armaments and so forth. So I really focus on this latter explanation for why the U.S. gives its unconditional support for Israel and the danger of that. The militaries of the U.S. and Israel are very tightly integrated. Equipment and intelligence are shared. Training goes on both directions. General Alexander Haig described Israel as the U.S.'s largest aircraft carrier, and it's an aircraft carrier that we don't have to pay for, we don't have to provide the sailors for. So that's the perspective, I think, that the elite who run this country have about Israel as a critical part of our world domination effort, our imperial effort to dominate. And Biden, in describing his support for Israel in the 1980s, says, if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to create it, have to invent it. In my perspective, and some of you may differ, but in my perspective, Israel is much too important a part of the imperial strategy of the U.S. and its allies, the neoliberal strategy, for them to allow Israel to be diminished or defeated. And they're willing to accept incredible human suffering, all the suffering that many of you have seen. If any of you go to TikTok, you see one video after another of horror going on. One of the things that is different about this war is that there are many cameras in Gaza and people are taking pictures of what's happening there. I've seen, there was a show on Democracy Now, which is a program that I really recommend. Democracy Now, maybe several months ago, a doctor from Denver, who was the head of I think the National Thoracic Surgeons Association, he spent time in Gaza, and he and another Palestinian American spent time in Gaza, and they wanted to make sure that media carried more pictures of what happens to people in Gaza. And one of them struck me very strongly. He showed a few pictures of children who were near the blast zone of one of these big bombs, and we saw a face of a child with all manner of shrapnel and rock and stones buried in the face of this child. He wanted more of those pictures to be seen by Americans so that they would know what we were paying for. So Israel seems to be, and the U.S. seem to be willing to accept the incredible suffering of others to protect and keep their relation with Israel, as well as to risk electoral defeat. And now we see that they have indeed failed to be elected. Who knows whether if Kamala had allowed someone to speak for Palestine at the Democratic Convention, or if she had come out and said, I will treat this whole thing differently than my predecessor. I will cut off military aid until Israel has a real ceasefire, really stops the humanitarian violence that they're perpetuating. So they're also willing to risk the opprobrium of the world's people. Foreign affairs depend not only on raw military power, but depend upon respect and kind of soft power, you might say. And I think this whole thing has damaged the U.S.'s ability to use soft power in its diplomatic relations with other countries. That the hypocrisy of immediately telling the International Criminal Court to condemn Putin for his attack on Ukraine, and then refusing to condemn in any way Israel's attack on Gaza and its treatment of Palestinians in the West Bank. That this seemed is seen all over the world. These videos are seen all over the world, all over the Arab world, all over the Muslim world, and have created a reaction. It seems like they're also willing to risk a catastrophic war with Iran in the Middle East. My wife and I went to Iran in 2008 with a group, two people who had been in the Peace Corps in Iran before the revolution in 1979. And it's a very sophisticated country. They have, you may know that engineers who graduate from the Iranian universities can immediately step into graduate programs in this country at places like Stanford and MIT and so forth. They have a very highly sophisticated university system. We went to a school in Iran, a girls' school, and it was like the 7th or 8th grade, and they were creating a temperature gradient, having freezing water at one end and boiling water at the other, and trying to create then a thermometer for themselves. And we saw them playing basketball with in the courtyard outside. So they have a very good educational system. Women make up the majority. The accusation is often made that Muslims don't treat women very well, but women are a majority of students at the universities in Iran. Women are a majority of doctors in Iran. So that's very important. Anyway, I'm afraid that that Biden and the people that control U.S. foreign policy seem to be willing to risk losing an election. They were more ready to lose an election than to give up the aid to Israel. And I'm very much afraid that while Trump might be might make some kind of deal in the Ukraine, which I would actually think is good, he will be worse with regard to the treatment of both Palestine and Iran. He immediately canceled the joint commission on restricting Iranian nuclear development. He immediately canceled that. That was a real way of controlling Iran, and he has spoken out in attacking Iran, and he is very close to Netanyahu, and he proposed a really ridiculous state system for that area. I fear that he said things like, well, let Israel finish the job. Well, that could be very dangerous if Israel thinks finishing the job includes still more violence in Lebanon and a war with Iran. I fear his belligerence towards Iran. I fear that. Those who control our foreign policy have been willing to accept the costs of imperialism, not only the suffering of Palestinians, not only electoral defeat, and not only the possibility of a catastrophic war, but have also been willing to accept the loss of power that the UN and international law provide. I think the long-term value of respect for international law and respect for the UN are our best way of ensuring that the world is a place that we can all live in and feel right about. So they've also been willing to accept the rise of McCarthyite repression. We see that in bills in Congress that declare that they'll remove the tax benefit of Palestine organizations in this country. The statements by many people in Congress against the students who have spoken out in support of Palestinians. To my mind, the students in different universities who have spoken out are in fact the conscience of this country, that we are supporting real massacres. Can you imagine if there are in fact 180,000 people killed, 200,000 or 300,000 people injured, 1.7 million people made homeless? It's a terrible thing that we would be supporting. I think we're in a very dangerous time right now. The U.S. long ago lost its position as the prime manufacturer of goods in the world and is now losing its dominance over the world's financial system. As more countries exchange goods in their own currencies, and there's a rise of economic associations such as BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, that are developing their own system for banking and exchange outside the US and Western European control system. And as the rest of the world does what it can to oppose neo-colonial dominance by the US and largely Western Europe. This really, so if we've lost the ability to manufacture, if we no longer can really fully control the financial system, this leaves military power as the way for US to achieve its goals. And this seems very dangerous to me. We see the danger in the war with Russia, in the threats of war with China, and in the US military support for Israel and the fear of a larger war. For me, I can't see a greater horror than US in a war with China. How can we even imagine such a thing? This has to come to an end if we're going to have a world I think such a war could easily escalate into, as people have warned about in the Ukraine, could easily escalate into a nuclear exchange. So that's a list of a great many horrors, a great many things to be afraid of in the current system. I would say one can ask if there's any good news, anything positive to say. And I would say there is, and that's the worldwide society's support for Palestinians and rejection of the U.S. Western European war on Gaza and Lebanon and threatened war with Iran. So the global support for Palestinians and opposition to Israeli-U.S. violence against Gaza and Lebanon has been amazing, as has its continuation over the past year. Hundreds of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands have demonstrated in Washington, in Germany, in Spain, in Yemen, in Indonesia, in Pakistan, and in many other countries in South America and elsewhere. In a poll taken last May, some 60% of Americans and some 80% of Democrats felt that the U.S. should seek a permanent ceasefire. That would mean not only calling for a ceasefire, which Biden and Harris called for and many Democrats called for, but doing what is necessary to bring about a ceasefire, and that is to threaten Israel with removing the military support for their violence. So unions like the United Auto Workers, the SEIU, the U.S. Postal Workers, the Communication Workers of America, as well as church groups like the United Church of Christ, Unitarian Universalist Association, all these groups have called for a permanent ceasefire. Many of these have called for the cutting off of U.S. military aid to Israel. Never in the past 7 decades, never has there been such widespread international support for Palestinian rights. So it's an amazing rise up of civil society in this country and in the world. Americans don't want another war in the Middle East. I see the worldwide civil society opposition to the Israeli oppression and to U.S. support for that oppression as, yes, it's a call for respect for Palestinian rights. Those rights must be defended, but also more as a call for a multipolar world in which the human rights of all people are respected. Much of the opposition from the global South can be seen as just such a call against colonialism, against racism, from countries that have only just recently extricated themselves from colonialism and the racist views that colonialism encourages and needs to encourage if it's going to maintain control of the world. The people of the world want a world that is not dominated by geostrategic rivalries or by US and Western European imperialism. They don't want a war with China. They don't want a war with Russia. To quote Jeff Helper again, we can have global Israel, which is our present Israel, our present world in which Israel and the United States combine their energies in control and domination, or global Palestine, the world that we want. It's up to us, really. As the genocidal violence against the people of Gaza continues with US support, and the whole world begins to oppose US hypocrisy, it's up to us to stand with the people of Gaza, to end the violence against Gaza and Lebanon, and to stop a war with Iran before it begins. We want to help create a world of peace and respect for international law. And the fact that so many people around the world are coming out into the streets and expressing themselves through their organizations is a very positive and wonderful thing. It's a kind of an expression of a long time goal of civil society to change the system that we live under. My wife and I went a few times to Uruguay. I had a colleague in Uruguay that I work with in my neuroscience, and we went a few times to Porto Alegre at the time to see the World Social Forum there, which had the same expression, the same effort to create a different kind of world, a world in which a multipolar world in which the threat of nuclear war is removed and the massive waste of expenditures for war is no longer the dominant framework of the world. So that was, I remember we were one of the wonderful moments was it was a large auditorium. There were people from all over the world there. And Arundhati Roy and Noam Chomsky were the panelists at the front of the auditorium. And we all locked arms as the band played Imagine by John Lennon. And we went back and forth all together, Imagined by John Lennon. It was a wonderful moment. So what can we do? We must help create a multipolar world, respect for international law. I would say, just mention a few things. Senator Bernie Sanders, Jeff Merkley, and I believe Senator Welch from Vermont are moving towards a vote in the Senate called a joint resolution on denial or disapproval, JRDs. This will be, they're calling for a vote that would say we will not send the $20 billion that has been asked for by the executive for more aid to $20 billion in military aid to Israel. This is an effort to deny that, and if that vote does come to a place, they have about 15 senators who support this. This will be the first time that a vote on military aid to Israel has ever been taken in the U.S. Congress. So we can write to our senators. Merkley is better than most. Unfortunately, Wyden is not. That we can write to our senators asking that they support this effort to reduce the violence and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and more generally to ask them to end U.S. unconditional military aid to Israel. We don't want to follow them into the war in Lebanon. We don't want to be responsible anymore for these perhaps as many as 150,000 dead in Gaza. We don't want to follow them into a war in Iran. We can look at our investment portfolios, our own or those of organizations that we are members of. Look at corporations that enable the military in Palestine, in Israel. The American Friends Service Committee has created their economic policy group has created a website called Investigate, which I urge you to look at. And they have systematically analyzed, with the help of a group in Israel called whoprofits.org. They have created a whole website where you can see the role of a whole set of different international corporations and their role in the Israeli war machine and the Israeli oppression. It's also very easy. You can, if you get a list of your own investments, or you get a list from an organization you're a member of, you can easily put that list into their website and it'll come out and show you which companies are ripe for divestment and recommended for divestment. The same website, many of you, I'm sure, you are here because you care about humanity, and that are probably is also concerned about our massive prison population and what happens in prisons. You're probably concerned about what may happen at the border, with immigration, separation of children from their parents, et cetera, et cetera. And so the same site, you can look at companies that are involved in these other issues also. They have what called Borders, one called Occupations, which focuses mainly on the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. And then they have one on prisons. And you can look at all three, or you can look at them individually and run a list of the corporations that you or your organization has there. It's a very, very well done website by the American Friends Service Committee. Then there's also American Friends Service Committee has initiated a program called Apartheid-Free Communities, where communities are encouraged to declare themselves apartheid-free. basically, there isn't a whole lot more than doing that. There are recommendations that are asked for, but there are now about 200 congregations, maybe one synagogue, a few businesses that have declared themselves apartheid free, and the hope is for this to grow. Certainly, we hope to get a whole lot more Unitarian congregations engaged on this, and we'll be working on that. And that, so they're encouraged to declare themselves apartheid free. Out in the lobby, I have a flyer that has resources. It has news sources that I trust. It has actions that can be taken, and it has organizations that one can join. Because I would say that as an individual, one can't do too much, but you can be much more effective if you're influencing and a part of an organization that is pursuing the same goals that you're pursuing. And some of those organizations, like Jewish Voice for Peace, you don't have to be Jewish to join Jewish Voice for Peace, but Jewish Voice for Peace is probably one of the most powerful organizations now in this country working for a justice for Palestinians. They have over 100,000 people. Most of them are Jewish, but you don't have to be Jewish. And they have a very effective program. I don't know if many of you saw shortly after October 7 of last year, when Jewish Voice for Peace brought all those people into Grand Central Station. There was an amazing video. They stopped the trains for a while by thousands of people in the middle of Grand Central Station, stopping the traffic there for a short time. So I would encourage you to take that list, and maybe I really recommend Democracy Now! Over the past year, I also subscribe on weekends to the New York Times, and we look at the Washington Post some. You can go many times, you get a paper, the New York Times, and there's hardly anything in it about Gaza. But every day that the Democracy Now! Has a program, they have programs Monday through Friday, Democracy Now! Has something there about what's happening in Gaza. This is seen as a really critical point for both the Palestinian human rights and for U.S. support for Israeli oppression. The whole world is recognizing the hypocrisy and the ugly side of imperialism here. And Democracy Now! Has people on there who are very, very, very good on that issue. I would like to, in fact, I'm going to close with a quote from Muhammad al-Kurd. Some of you may have seen him. He was when there was events in Sheikh Jarrah, a suburb of Jerusalem. He was removed from his house there. This is a quote from him. It has to do with the phrase that we are all Palestinians. It could no longer be just a metaphor. So this is from Muhammad Kurd. The rallying cry that we are all Palestinians must abandon the metaphor and manifest materially, meaning all of us, Palestinians or otherwise, must embody the Palestinian condition, the condition of resistance and refusal in the lives we lead and the company we keep, meaning we reject our complicity in this bloodshed and our inertia when confronted with all of that blood, because Gaza cannot stand alone in sacrifice. So I would say, both for a world that we want, a world ruled by respect for law, a lack of domination by geostrategic struggles and imperial power, that we join in this struggle for Palestinian rights. So thank you very much for listening to my harangue, and I appreciate it.
We have one question from Hank while we're getting started in the friendly house, and I'm sure Mr. Bell gets this question a lot. Do you think there is a way to disentangle being anti-Israeli from being anti-Semitic? Because you want to be part of the solution, not the problem.
This is the weaponization of the charge of anti-Semitism is a very prominent, very, very prominent. It's the major. It seems like Israel cannot defend what it does, but it can accuse those who accuse it of horrors of some kind or another of being anti-Semitic. And it must be stated very clearly that anti-Semitism is completely different from anti-Zionism. One can be anti-Zionist and not be anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism is a scourge, and one must do all that one can to deny it. But that doesn't mean that one should not criticize Israel. The identification of Israel with Judaism is a huge problem. And this weaponization of anti-Semitism is the major defense, I would say now, of Israel and its behavior. Anti-Zionism is different, quite a different thing. Anti-Israel behavior is quite a different thing from anti-Semitism. You may know that in the Arab world before 1948 and for years, many of the Jewish people who lived in the Arab world considered themselves as Arabs. They spoke Arabic and so forth. And there were places in the world, in Spain and in Istanbul and in Sicily, where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived together. And the record of Arab people with regard to prejudice against Jewish people is much better than the record of Western nations and European nations.
Great. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kurt, for your presentation. And I appreciate what South Africa has done with its stance regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I see a lot of parallels with what Americans have done with Native Americans over the centuries. And why do you think Americans have such a hard time seeing those parallels?
I don't know, but certainly I do think that one of the reasons, there were two reasons that I gave why the U.S. gives its unconditional support for Israel. One is the power of an Israeli lobby and AIPAC and so forth, and the fear of Congress people from losing money from Christian Zionists and Jewish people, or losing or being attacked by these groups, having their opponent be supported. So that's one thing, and I think the role of Israel in the high tech and in its integration within the U.S. military system, those are two reasons. But I think also we kind of recognize that we behaved badly, that we are a settler colonial state that has still not fully recognized that, I would say. So I would think that the parallels between Israel as a settler colonial state and the U.S. as a settler colonial state is part of the reason for the support that we give to Israel.
I thank you for your presentation. And I do not know that much about this, all the intricacies of politics in the Middle East. But I asked, what are the rest of the Arab world doing for it? As I understand, Egypt is refusing any refugees. Egypt is refusing refugees. Jordan is already full, and they're refusing refugees. Does the Arab world have responsibility? I know. I just asked.
It does have responsibility. It doesn't fulfill that responsibility. But they're afraid to. The Arab street is I think uniformly alarmed, and they've seen these videos of from TikTok and Instagram and other places of the violence going on, and the heads of especially the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia are afraid of their population. So although they would like to make a deal with Israel, after October 7, they feel they can't do that without appearing to support a Palestinian state. But yes, I think most activists feel the Arab states have not done what they could. When the International Court of Justice declared that there's a plausible case for genocide going on in Palestine, that it called on member states to take what action they could to prevent a genocide from occurring. And they have not done that. So even Turkey, I think, provides oil, and the Arab states provide gas to Israel. So enough countries have not stepped up to engage in the kind of economic warfare that is needed to change things with regard to Palestine.
Palestinians were not allowed to immigrate outside of Palestine since 1948. And so it seems that the Arab world bears a chunk of responsibility for this whole process too. As I said, I'm a novice at this, so I don't have any hard opinions on it.
So you're speaking of the accusation that Israel should be able to push all the Palestinians out into the Arab world and they become citizens of Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. But the Palestinians feel like we would feel if we were forced to move to Canada, and some other, or maybe not so badly right now. Some of us might go willingly, but they feel like this is their country. They have their ties there historically. So yes, I don't think I think the expulsion of the Palestinians from Israel should not dominate, and it should not be blamed on the Arabs for not accepting the refugees. That's my picture of it. Egypt has been very clear about, but Egypt might relent too. I do feel like the massive destruction that's going on in Gaza, it's really unlivable. There's no, and they talk about it would take 15 years to clear the rubble. How are those people going to live? And if there were a peace, it might be that Sisi could be bribed or persuaded, loans forgiven, to take in the people of Gaza. I don't know. It could happen. That would be what Israel, I think, would really sought in this effort. They've already, as you may know, in the northern Gaza, north of Gaza City, they have created something called the General's Plan, where they have denied humanitarian aid to these cities just north of Gaza City, and the people can either leave or they will be considered combatants and shot.
We got a Republican administration coming in, and the only reason why the Republicans would ever not do anything is because we can't afford it. Is there a way you could make war, which is hideously expensive, in this case, look hideously expensive? We had 2 wars in Iraq. I think the first ones we spent enough to buy every family in Iraq a Mercedes, and the second one we spent enough to build them a house. And so why in the world can't we just, do some math and say, hey, this doesn't work, let's find some other way?
Well, that's a good plan if we could get the media to cooperate. I think, I feel the media has not done us well, the mainstream media, of course, that we have spent, I believe there are about $7 trillion on Iraq and Afghanistan in our wars on terror. And where has there been could you say that those have successfully made life better for Americans? I don't think so. But where has been the critical media that says, here, we've spent $7 trillion, which could put a Mercedes in everybody's hands, and give us schools and healthcare and the things that mass transit. Where has been the critical examination of that military use in Afghanistan and Iraq to say, was this a mistake then? Didn't, but no. So I think we need.
How much is our aid to Israel costing us?
I think right now we under Obama, we declared that we would give 3.8 billion a year to Israel. But since I think it's upwards now of about 30 billion that has been given over the past year in supplemental appropriations for Israel's war. But yes, I think we need to demand that the effort to dominate the world militarily with our 800 bases, our threatened war with China, our war, I disagree with our war in the Ukraine, our support for Israel, that we need to say this money must be better spent than that for the people. I was struck, I saw a picture the other day of comparison of mass transit in China, high-speed trains in China. Almost all of China is networked by high-speed trains. It's now 4 hours from Beijing to Shanghai. And on the same picture was a picture of mass high-speed trains in the U.S. There's one line, I think, that might go from Boston to New York. We need mass transit in this country that doesn't rely on airplanes and so forth. So anyway, I don't know if that deals with what you're asking or not. Supplement it if you have it, if there's something more.
My question doesn't concern about Arab people, why they do not accept refugee, but why such a rich countries like United States and European Union, they don't do, the same, because there is a law that they are able to accept a refugee, like Ukrainian, or even they accepted Polish during the 1980. So I think the same supposed to be done with, concerning Palestinian.
Are you asking why the U.S. and Europe don't accept the Palestinians as refugees?
No action. Yeah. Yes.
The fault really is Israel's lack of acceptance of the Palestinians as human beings that deserve their country as much as the Israelis. And that should be the focus, as opposed to doing Israel's task of expelling all the Palestinians and asking the rest of the world to accept them as refugees. That would be my perspective on it. Jordan is almost all Palestinian now. Most of Jordan are Palestinian people. And there are Palestinians all over the Arab world, but I think their effort to keep their heritage as Palestinians must be respected. I'm not sure. I think immigration is a big issue. It seems to have the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and all the refugees created by those wars, and in Syria, have led to the explosion of right-wing politics in Europe, that people are afraid of having people who are different from them as part of their country. And that has been an issue that has helped the right wing in Europe come to power. I don't know what else I can say.
I don't want to open a can of worms, and if we don't want to do it, just say no. But I would be curious to know what your stand is of one state versus two states.
I feel there's now Jeff Helper and Mazem Kumsia, who's a Palestinian scientist. He has created the Museum of Natural Science in Bethlehem, and a number of other Palestinian. Ilan Pappé, you may know of Ilan Pappé. He is the historian, now he's originally from Israel. He wrote a book called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. and he and Avi Shlaim, another Jewish Israeli, that there's a movement afoot called One Democratic State. And back in the 70s, this was the call of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, for one democratic state in which all people from the Jordan to the Mediterranean had equal rights, and that for me is the only long-term solution, is to allow for one democratic state that gives the equal rights for all people within that state. And there is a international effort to bring that forward called One Democratic State. You could look that up on Google and you'd find all about it. Jeff Halper is a major actor in that effort.
Joyce had a question about the influence of women in other countries. It's been rising. They have gained power in legislative bodies as well as heads of state. And we're wondering if a direct call to women potentially in these other countries and in the U.S., would that be beneficial in any way? Are you already seeing that happen?
I'm afraid I'm not very well informed. I know that in Iran, women, when we were there, we saw signs saying, respect women, and women are half of the country, and there are majority of students are women in universities in Iran. Doctors are women, but I do think an appeal to women would be helpful. That's about as much as I might be able to say about that.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Yeah,
I'm not very well informed, I'm afraid.
And our final question comes from Hank. Do you see any parallels between the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the war in Ukraine and Russia? And do you feel that support should not be or should be given to Ukraine in a similar or dissimilar fashion? I know that they are not one and the same, but what parallels do you see with those two conflicts?
Well, I think the U.S. should stop both. That would be my perspective. I think.
I'm sorry. My question was, why should we not support Ukraine as it resists Russia's invasion?
My own perspective is that Russia's invasion came about because they warned time and again prior to their invasion in 22 about that this was an essential security thing to have NATO expand into the Ukraine, that they had said as early as 2008 that this was something that they could not tolerate. I think if the Chinese military alliance against the United States wanted to have Mexico become a part of that alliance, that we would react in a way similar to Russia. I think the security needs of Russia, the need for them to oppose a military alliance. NATO is not a cultural group. It's a military alliance against Russia, originally against the Soviet Union and now against Russia. It is a worldwide alliance that went into Afghanistan and is expanding into the Chinese area. I feel that the mistakes made early on led to this crisis, and the only way out is for a negotiation that I don't think, even just practically on the long run, that Russia has the manpower and the resources to win this war. I think a negotiation now is what should happen. But I think that our own Clinton's allowance of expansion of NATO right up to the borders with Russia was a major mistake and was viewed as a mistake by Kissinger, by Burns, and other kind of authorities in this country. It's a tragedy, but I think that would be my perspective on it.
All right. Well, thank you very much.